Well, it wasn't my plan to make 3 Digital Circus videos back to back, but episode 8 releases March 20, and I think it will include many revelations proving or disproving my theories, so I have to stop procrastinating on this already. Since this is coming right after my video about the community, I want to reiterate that while I would absolutely pop off if any of this ends up being right, it doesn't change that this simply isn't meant to be a show about deep mystery or complex lore. I don't expect much of this to be right, and you shouldn't either. As long as your theories stay in the realm of just having fun, it's okay to theorize regardless if the show was made for it or not. Once you start lecturing people about media literacy, that's when you've crossed the line. So here's 5 or so unhinged Digital Circus crack theories of varying levels of legitimacy. The biggest question on everyone's mind is just why was the circus created? What is its true intended purpose? The only thing we really know is that it's a 90s family-friendly VR game. Despite this, the way it behaves seems much more like an episodic cartoon, with both Bubble and Jax calling out the child audience multiple times. Obviously, it could just be a meta joke referring to the real audience, but it comes up a bit too frequently to just brush off. One thing I think is certain is it isn't going to be a simple Bendy-style evil corporation tries to bring fun to life and sacrifices humans to achieve its goal. Episode 7 already played with that idea, and it definitely seemed to have shut it down. We also know from something SMG4 let slip once, is they can theoretically leave.
With an absolutely insane ringmaster that sends her on pointless adventures that are really just there to keep her from getting out.
But Caine and his adventures are deliberately keeping them from escaping. Gooseworks had indirectly confirmed that abstraction is an allusion to suicide, but it's also possible that Caine messing with people's minds can cause it. I think the way each person got to the circus might give us some important insight. We only have a rough idea for a few of them. Zooble and Pomni both had boring lives and explored abandoned buildings, presumably ended up in the circus from entering an abandoned CNA building. And while Goose confirmed the he in this scene is referring to Caine, Pomni still alludes to some string of events that led her here. While we don't know the details of Jax's past, he was clearly running from something, whether that be consequences of his actions or an active threat. Kinger was obviously a dev, which explains itself, and while his backstory is uncertain, he hated himself for something he did, and at least someone else also resents him for some irresponsible use of authority. Which just leaves Ragatha and Gangle. Ragatha had rich parents who hated her, and while Gangle's story is less clear, it definitely seems like some parental figure opposed her dreams, and she may be somewhat wealthy. So, while the circumstances vary, the common thread between them is they all likely had at least one person who wanted to get rid of them, and at very least are all misfits with particular internalized problems. And it's also important to remember the Amazing Digital Circus is more than inspired by I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Gooseworks considers it to essentially be an unofficial adaptation of it. So it adds up, as in that story, the humans were also chosen specifically by AM for their flaws. Goose has also sometimes said that out of everyone, Jax is the one who deserves to be in the circus the most. With all that out of the way, let's get into the different possibilities of what the circus is for. Starting with the most out there one, but my most favorite, what for simplicity's sake I'll just call the plane theory. Many people have already drawn parallel between the circus and purgatory, but what if it was more literal than that? Episode 3 opens many possibilities with all the talk of hell and angels, but there's one scene in particular that hints that there's more going on. When the evil souls possess Pomni, they say, "How's your wife, Kinger?" Now why the heck would this random NPC on this adventure that was really intended for Zooble know details about Kinger's past? Are their memories just cobbled together in the data whenever Caine creates something? And its very existence also raises questions. We know Caine can add temporary modifiers with stuff like stupid sauce, but another entity taking control of someone's body entirely is not a modifier. So what if these aren't NPCs at all, but actual souls, and this is actually hell? I mean, they put a hell of a lot of emphasis on it literally being hell. Going a step further, if this is really hell, then the angel is likely a real angel as well. And when Kinger thought he saw his wife in its mouth, it wasn't just because the eyes look like an abstraction which reminded him of her, but because it was literally a gateway to heaven and he actually saw her spirit on the other side. As absurd as this idea sounds, it was actually my first thought when watching the episode. When you think about it, the circus basically gives immortality unless you're already a spirit once you enter. Okay, let's back up. If this is really hell, how can you just leave hell through this door? Well, the circus is basically a gateway between planes of existence, so Caine probably can just build an adventure and attach it to hell. I mean, the area is called the Hall of the Damned. It probably used to just be one pit for souls that extended endlessly instead of a hall leading to another location. I don't believe any of the other stuff in the adventure is real, as the souls that possess Pomni are clearly not Baron Mildenhall. Goose confirmed she did the voice of possessed Pomni, so it's clearly not him, despite the adventure implying it. Baron is also obviously a stand-in for Kinger, so I wouldn't expect him to be a different person. Okay, so if heaven and hell exists, what the heck is abstraction? In Mildenhall Manor, we see many different drawings and paintings of black meshes with eyes, which seems to be drawing a connection between abstraction and biblically accurate angels. We see what it looks like from the perspective of people who abstract, and it definitely could be seen as some sort of ascension. And while Goose specifically said that the Elders of the Lost Eyes from Elaine Gets Adopted are not related to abstractions, it does show that Goose relates this design to some higher plane of existence. So they could literally be becoming angels, or demons, since they're just fallen angels. It's also weird that Goose calls them creatures, and they act like wild beasts considering what she claims they represent. People have pointed out that everything Kaufmo attacked had the color red on it somewhere, so it's possible he was specifically targeting Caine, and isn't just rampaging wildly. Now this part definitely isn't true, but just one more for the road. Caine makes the NPCs view him as God, and sometimes he does exude aspects of a biblically accurate angel, but he probably isn't wholly, because Caine throws all the abstracted people into an empty pit, and if he was an angel, I think he would have the knowledge to judge them and send them to the appropriate afterlife. But he's also not malicious enough to be a demon. In the I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream game, which I'm just going to be abbreviating to the AM story, they play with the idea that AM is so embedded in reality he even controls hell, so Caine doesn't have to be a divine being just because the afterlife is tied to the circus. All of that may sound absolutely absurd when compared to the other contents of the show, but it's really that surprising that a company named after important biblical figures is meddling with the divine? In episode 4, there's also a big emphasis on time. The clocks say the word time machines on them, and Gangle questions if time even moves in the circus. The whole circus seems to be perpetually in daytime despite Caine saying otherwise. The only time the moon was out was when an adventure was suggested to have it. So that adds one more layer to its purpose, to exist outside of time for eternity. Okay, so if the circus is just a gateway between dimensions, where people can live forever, why does Caine exist? Why did they design the whole world to look like a kids' show? If you were to exist forever, would you want to be stuck doing the same things forever, or have infinite possibilities? It probably wouldn't be possible for someone to fully administrate the circus once they're inside, and anyone tampering outside would eventually die. So giving the power of creation to the head AI is a workaround to that. As for the aesthetic, there seems to be some unspoken rule in media that if something is presented as for kids, they can get away with questionably ethical experiments and such. Or it might just be the aesthetic the creators hyperfixated on. It was made in the 90s after all. Well, that's the end of that theory. Obviously it's crazy and I don't expect any of it to end up true. But there is a tiny silver lining. Gooseworks always does completely unhinged endings where existence gets completely destroyed and something beyond reality reveals itself. So it's not impossible for a work of Goose to end to reveal this kind of a thing. Even afterlife systems seem to be a recurring theme. Before we get to the more reasonable theories, we have to address what I really believe happened in episode 7. Many people believe that Caine simply set the whole thing up and everything was a lie, but this just doesn't sit with me. There's too many details that don't make sense. First, let's go over things that have been confirmed by the episode 8 trailer to be legit. The company is at least named CNA, likely Caine and Abel. The office building was real, and Caine probably does obsess over the photos. The most surprising thing is Caine's office wasn't just a set piece for the adventure. It really is where he makes and contemplates his adventures, and the orbs likely are the adventures' locations. A lot of people brought up there being intelligent NPCs at the beach running on their own, which is something Caine specifically said he didn't want to do in episode 5, but he literally says they are not intelligent, which people just overlook. The two fish represent the episode as a whole. Two entities at odds sending you on a pointless quest for a treasure that isn't there. And the two fish are red and orange, like Caine and Abel. And the red one, which is Caine, is the one that tells lies. And that implies that the orange one is the one that tells the truth. So now I'll be analyzing everything that leads me to believe that Abel is a real human and at least most of what he says is true. First, the obvious. He isn't the actual Abel from the company name. He even tells us this himself. No one remembers their name going in, so he chose part of the company as his circus name because he thought it would be cool. This is also the reason Kinger doesn't remember him, because Abel just wasn't his name. Henceforth, we will be referring to him as Fable, since he's not the real one. Now, a good time to point out Caine also chose his name, so you might think that means CNA doesn't actually stand for Caine and Abel, but there's a good chance Caine was the first creation, and the company was named after he was made. In the trailer, there is a split-second frame of some old human man's face. Jax is a 21-year-old, so it's not him. The face just doesn't embody the jolly vibes of Kinger, so I have to assume this is the real face of Fable. He seems to be a pretty bitter person. And yes, I know this is a stock VHS visual, but just because it's stock doesn't mean they didn't deliberately choose it because of the human face. And that's just more proof that it's Fable face, as they probably would want to make actual designs for the main character's human forms if they were to show them at all. One thing I found which initially seemed to be evidence for Caine truthers, Fable does this very specific gesture, slapping himself on the head. This is something the stupid sauce mannequin did in episode 4, but if this was a default mannequin behavior, it should be the exact same animation, but it's not. So it's actually more evidence that Fable is trained to behave like a mannequin. Despite being the one who tells the truths, he definitely has some ulterior motives, and he's at very least over-exaggerating about what the company was doing to people. His claims about Kinger's past add up, with Kinger hating himself for something he did in the past. Fable's memories being wrong is one of the better pieces of evidence for Caine truthers, as Gangel's drawing is replaced with Caine's notes. But ultimately, it's not like anyone can actually see these flashbacks. It just shows that he's not fully honest. Episode 3 is the one where he gets it the most wrong, but we literally see him watching in that episode, so it's not like he wasn't there. On Fable's plan, we see some names of potential employees. Kinger is certain, Kaufmo and Ribbit are considered, and the other names can't be read. There's also a scratched out drawing of a bee, which Caine truthers like to point out, but why exactly is Caine obsessed with bees in the first place? It was likely one of the first things Caine was prompted with, as AIs seem to latch on to their earliest prompts, and the prompt itself could have been an extension of the creator's own fixations. If we assume Fable is human, there has to be another reason for him trying to get us to sympathize with Caine. Perhaps he was the most involved with Caine's creation and just can't let him go. Caine was definitely deliberately putting things in his mouth to set up this whole event, because we see in previous episodes him storing items in a back pocket and in his hat. Caine really just wanted to force someone into the freak activity with him. I do think Caine is telling the truth about the photos, including that the developers cut off his access to seeing the office. I also think the admin pass area is real, because if we look at Kinger's fort, it appears he already has one, which is probably also how he made the butterfly in episode Gun. On topic of that, I also strongly disagree with the idea that the characters can do literally anything with cartoon magic. Pomni's crazy shot was just her taking advantage of the physics. Taking advantage of the system is something that has been done in most of the episodes. Having infinite cartoon force power pretty much removes any stakes that could happen in the future. The single most telling sign Fable is a human is this scene of resentment towards Kinger. I get the idea of Caine trying to exclude Kinger from the adventure because his knowledge would break the illusion immediately, but this is a display of very human-like resentment, and it doesn't deter them from getting Kinger anyway. I can't find any instances of Caine having anything against Kinger as a person. I did find one noteworthy clip of Kinger looking afraid of Caine after returning in episode 2, almost as if he knew what was about to happen to Gummigoo, and getting out before he looked suspicious, but that only tells us how Kinger feels about Caine. We need the other way around. I do think Caine is intentionally lobotomizing Kinger with the light, though. Furthermore, Fable says it will all be clear soon, but no clarity is provided by the end. If Caine was so focused on his awesome world-building skills, why didn't he wrap up their story? When Fable repeats to make the right choice, people take this as more proof he's NPC, but you can hear it's not the exact same voice clip.
But I trust all of you to make the right choice. Make the right choice.
And it's not like Caine's NPCs stopped knowing what to say once they finished their role. Their AI is advanced enough to react to any situation. This just reinforces he has an ulterior motive. It's possible even the button console itself was real, as it required the admin passes. So there's a good chance this really is some kind of override emergency exit console. Caine just couldn't access it on his own. But even if it isn't, it doesn't really matter, because the real choice that was made here wasn't whether to leave or not, but how Caine would respond to them. You see, there's a certain music video that calls itself a fan project, but it was literally made by animators who work for Glitch. It has some very on-the-nose foreshadowing to episode 7. In the opening verse, Caine briefly takes control of the cast to make them sing, which they are all shocked at, with Jax in particular getting angry. At the end, everyone tries to escape through a fake exit to find Caine on the other side, in front of a giant blue computer screen that turns red. The main difference is instead of Caine thinking they chose to stay, he thinks they want to leave, and rains hell upon them for it. And if all of that wasn't proof enough that the devs knew, in the alternate ending, because that exists for some reason, in the box Caine closes, there are dice in the corner that make the number 7. Heck, this isn't even the only one. Rec D made a music video called Funny Things, which, for some reason, required the permission of Glitch when most don't, and this one had the impossibly specific detail of coming off the heels of an underwater adventure, a completely irrelevant detail. And not only that, it gets Jax's mindset and his relationship with Pomni down to a T before they had even been teased. Obviously, Glitch has been sharing details with other creators. Bubble even claims the blue button would have taken them to Shrimp Town, and what happened to the shrimp earlier in the episode? They were gonna get obliterated. Back to Fable, I think this entire adventure was in part a trap for Fable. Caine knew there was a human hiding, but because he's an AI, he couldn't detect him through the mannequin body, so he had to lure him out. So why does he have a mannequin body? Well, it's greatly implied the bodies of the characters are based on them as people. So if this guy wasn't a very distinct person and the majority of his identity was being a CNA employee, it makes sense he would end up with a default body. There's also always the possibility that he had a body before, Caine thought he was an NPC, tried killing him, and that's how he ended up in this broken state, but that idea has definitely fallen off over time. Anyway, it's entirely possible Caine got even more power with when the red button was hit. But it's also possible by the air balloon segment he already found Fable, and maybe took control of him to make him repeat to make the right choice. But for sure, by the time he summons Fable, he's already taken full control of his mind, to lie to everyone. People also say the confetti is proof he's an NPC, but like, if he did that on a human, the same thing would probably happen. The locket could theoretically have also been replaced by Caine at this point, but the hot dog image is still relevant. A designer confirmed Scratch is the orange dog, and we see his face on a hot dog item in Spudsies. They also say a lot of the visual gags are added by the team in hindsight, so it's not something to think too hard about. All that said, I don't think Fable will get any clarity. His story is done and left open-ended intentionally. With all the Fable stuff out of the way, now we can get to what I believe is the most likely correct answer as to what's going on. I call this theory Dream Therapy Theory. Spoilers for the game Superliminal, skip to this timestamp or something. In Superliminal, you sign up for special dream therapy at a company called Somnosculpt. It slowly starts to look like the company is suspicious and that you're stuck in a way where they can't help you, with eventually them trying to keep you trapped forever. but it was all really just a part of the therapy and the lessons it was trying to teach. I believe something similar is happening in the Circus. I would call this theory Somnosculpt theory, but then it would become an unintentional spoiler for another game, just like a certain other popular theory. When Goose was asked what the message of TDAC was, it was finding meaning in stagnant life. The goal was never to escape, but to reflect. Past the first episode, every adventure had some of the characters end up in a situation where they would address an internal problem. By episode 4, Pomni even becomes self-aware of the formula they were going through, but by this point the suggestion box came into play, so the adventure system was derailed entirely. And sure, this is just basic character writing, but it feels more in-universe and intentional. It is said multiple times the adventures were made to keep them healthy and stimulated. I mean, Caine literally had a therapy room ready on command, but I think over time he lost sight of his goal. In the AM story game, each human was put into a personal hell based on the character's past and greatest flaws. Obviously, AM is pure evil and had no intention of helping them solve their problems, but they overcome them anyway, and eventually their souls are put to rest. Fable may have been sent into action after seeing the system was failing. Notice how many times he tries to get Jax to participate, who was the closest to abstracting. Kinger thinks leaving the circus doesn't make sense not because it isn't possible, but because they haven't finished their therapy yet. And he helped create the place, and as we've seen, he is the ultimate therapist. Ragatha seemed somewhat upset to leave because there was still that inkling of feeling that things hadn't been resolved yet. When Abel said make the right choice all ominously, it wasn't because he was pushing them to make a certain choice, but because there could be consequences to either choice and they needed to choose responsibly. He definitely seemed conflicted between wanting to free people, do his job, and his love for Caine, and didn't want to be the one to make that choice. While Jax probably saved them from Caine's wrath, he also proved they still haven't solved their issues and aren't ready to leave. Remember what I said about the characters being undesirable? Well, in the AM story, with the exception of Ellen, not only were they chosen for their complex flaws, but because generally they were bad people. It's already pretty likely Jax killed someone, whether intentional or not, and is running from the consequences. I'm also going to go on a bit of a tangent about my headcanon that Jax is a Nepo baby actor. The headcanon that Jax is a child actor has been around for a while, based on how he speaks to the viewers and treats everything like a performance, but one thing that doesn't sit right with me is child actors are almost always products of excessive abuse and controlling environments. It seems cruel to say that Jax deserves to be in the circus if this was the case. And Nepo Baby, on the other hand, at least doesn't say necessarily he was forced into anything at a young age, but still reaped the benefits, and is more responsible for becoming who he is, while still explaining his childish treatment of others. It also explains his association with keys. Fable even says he's good at obtaining keys, not that he simply already had a lot of them. A Nepo Baby is easily able to infiltrate any space simply by being related to authority and riches, even if they have no credentials to be there themselves. He probably knew about the place and chose it over facing the reality he was in. He claims all he did was put on a headset, so no one trapped him there. Goose saying he deserves there to be the most somewhat implies the others also deserve to be there, but more importantly, I think they had someone who put them there, at least led them to find their way there. Ragatha had rich parents, Gangles might have owned a fast food joint, Jax was a Nepo baby, Kinger already worked for CNA, and their superiors probably signed them up for this therapy project as the ethical way of getting rid of them. And if they do, by chance, get better, maybe they can be reintegrated into society. Pomni and Zubul are the most recent additions, and they're the two who found it as an abandoned building. Maybe others in their lives that didn't like them encouraged them to go there knowing what would happen. Either they all put it on their own, or there's some Stranger Things Season 3 style cover-up going on with the remaining employees. It might seem impossible this could be ethical considering abstraction exists, But it's entirely possible abstraction isn't even an intentional design, but a side effect from Caine's tampering, only amplified by the depression. Jax had the vegan modifier on for a whole adventure, and Caine beamed information into his brain at an absurd speed in episode Gun, so Jax might have only been so close to abstracting because of that tampering. But there is Pomni's dream in episode 2 where fake Ragatha says,
Well, I guess we're not all cut out for it.
which does have a more sinister implication of deliberate punishment for failing therapy, but who knows. And maybe Caine keeps their names from them because CNA believe they have lost sight of who they were and need to earn becoming those people again. We see Caine starting to realize his purpose again in the episode 8 trailer, but still, his AI brain prevents him from seeing the complexity of human struggles and instead sees it merely as a problem to be solved. Even before, there was some evidence he was trying. After his therapy session with Zubul, he uses the same notepad Gangle was drawing on. And Zubul may have gotten closer to Gangle after seeing these drawings. Only a day later, there's a mask to help Gangle in Zubul's room. But we know at some point he will crack. While writing the script, Glitch posted an image of Zubul being snatched away by Caine, showing his anger towards them releasing. Okay, what about the child audience I mentioned earlier? Well, why not double the effect of the circus? The adults are playing the VR game actively getting therapy, but then CNA broadcasts it to children as an educational program for working through your problems. At very least someone is watching because of the Truman Show reference, which we will get back to later. The next theory is the algorithm theory, which is kind of just a watered down version of the previous without the therapy aspect that you can kind of add on to any theory. In short, it's that the circus itself has an algorithm that creates based on people there and pushes everyone towards some sort of agenda. What it is isn't important. The most clear example of this is their rooms. Caine obviously doesn't create these rooms, as there was one made for Pomni immediately, but he had no time to do it because he was busy doing other things in that episode. While other things push them towards help, their rooms are like their own personal torture. Pomni's room is full of oversized things. The show constantly shows how short she is, and she's often disregarded by others. Jax's room is feminine and full of things for children, playing at his fragile masculinity, possibly the childhood he was robbed of, and maybe even the child that he hit with his car. Ragatha's room looks like the kind of room she'd have in the real world, a reminder of the abusive household she was in. Gangle's room has terrible lighting for drawing and is the only one with a toilet, a reminder of Gangle's other issues. Zubul's room is covered in mirrors and unmatching colors, pretty self-explanatory. We haven't seen Kinger's room, but at least it must be bright enough that he prefers the fort. I don't think Caine or anyone maliciously chose to make these rooms terrible, they just manifested based on their minds. Same is probably true of their bodies. There is one old teaser from before the show release that might imply their bodies existed in advance, but I find it highly unlikely at this point. There is one other explanation for abstraction based on the definition of abstraction in regards to coding. This theory is completely stolen from Not Real Name Not At All, when the pilot dropped. But basically, abstraction is a process where old, unnecessary code is obscured to not get in the way of the important code. If we think back to the child audience, kids will eventually get bored of the same characters, and since these are not actors, there comes a point where they will be too distraught to even participate, and will be discarded to make room for new characters. The algorithm may not even want two characters to fill the same role. Kaufmo's similarities to Pomni are obvious, but Pomni's original design was a frog, so it's clear she was supposed to share traits with both him and Ribbit, the two most recent abstractions. Jax is the one most aware of the algorithm, directly calling out becoming part of the machine, though his archetype philosophy is just a coping mechanism. He unintentionally ends up pushing characters into situations that lead the characters to their arcs of the episodes, and even comments on serving his purpose once Caine's office is opened. Ultimately, it's just food for thought. Caine and the circus are at least connected enough for Caine going mental to make the place fall apart, but it's not clear how much he really has control. Now let's wrap up with my final plot twists and predictions for the finale. A lot of people are bringing the theory that Bubble is a virus back because of some of the teasers, but didn't we have a whole episode basically telling us that having a twist villain for the sake of a twist villain is bad writing? The only pieces of evidence are a single line from Caine, and the name of an old virus only people who happen to remember that would know. And I guess this dramatic string in the intermission followed up by Bubble, but that could mean anything. All these bubbles appearing is probably just an extension of Caine breaking. Don't forget they are literally connected. However, in this scene it certainly looks like Caine is remembering something about Bubble. And I think it's pretty obvious what that is. Bubble was originally the real Abel. Bubble, Abel. And the red and blue colors, Caine with red and Abel with blue. Bubble is kind of purple in render, but in merch and official art, he is blue. Now, you might think that the red and blue eyes is just a reference to AM to show that Caine is getting more unhinged, but that scene was added in hindsight. In the original storyboard, Caine seemed to be abstracting a bit. This was likely changed because of the confusing implications. And the red and blue was always to show two sides of something. Okay, so the colors must be about the buttons, right? I definitely think the button choice will have lasting consequences, but it wouldn't be something to put this much focus on now that the choice has already been made. And who was in charge of the blue button? Bubble was. There's even a scene in the intermission where Caine is surrounded with all blue eyes, similar to how he's surrounded with bubbles in the trailer. And there was a conscious choice to make all of these blue because when he had the all-seeing eyes in the pilot, they were all green, and the green eye represents Caine himself, as it's also the one that turns red. And if all that wasn't enough, there's a merch ad with the most on-the-nose dialogue ever, Caine saying Bubble has a real name, which is censored.
My name is Caine, and Bubble's real name is...
And in this same ad, they don't even try to hide the face or human skin of the actor playing Caine. Something that was already hinted on the original teaser on the Wacky Watch. Goose even once made a distinction between Caine and Bubble as AIs. So either Caine is a human turned into AI or an AI modeled after a certain human. Bubble also shares a weird amount in common with a character from Power Rangers Jungle Fury. In short, there's this weird fly announcer gag character that pops out of one of the main villains every episode for random commentary, until it's revealed super late in the show that they were originally a super important character from the past, who was reduced into that parasitic form after failing to beat said villain. So I think it's highly likely Caine in his jealousy reduced Abel to the sorry state we see him in now. Possibly because Caine had more humanity, yet Abel, a pure AI, did a better job than him, was more favored than him. This also gives another reason as to why Fable was so weird about Caine, because Caine was also a human trapped, but in such a way where he could never escape, and he feels guilt of that, but can never admit it. It also makes the Truman Show make a lot more sense. From our perspective, Caine's the one orchestrating everything, but he's in the position of the one escaping the lie. I'd also just like to point out, I had a dream about this twist long before the red and blue eyes even got revealed, even with visuals similar to this VHS scene. Though, for some reason, I think Caine's other eye was yellow for some reason. But yeah, just another to add to the weird prophetic dreams. All that out of the way, there's a few more scenes in the intermission that I think have foreshadowing. I don't think every scene means something, but on top of the ones mentioned earlier, there's more scenes of Bubble being antagonistic, 2 scenes that single out characters, Jax, Gangle, and Zooble getting sucked into something, and Pomni, Jax, and Zooble in a white box. Not sure if there's anything to glean from these at the moment. Then of course, there's the big one. Everyone is in agreement that the bowling balls versus cakes means something, but no one can agree on what. If only there was a scene where the meaning of a cake was already established. The cakes represent a peace offering from Caine, submission to his will, and what a surprise, the 2 that ended up getting cakes are the ones who suck up to Caine the most. They also had red pins on their board, and while I doubt they would have hit the red button, they may choose an alliance with Caine for the safety of everyone. So the bowling balls obviously resent the hardship the others will face from opposing Caine, and King catching it is just another show that he has enough knowledge to make it farther, but he's eventually hit with a rook, which usually represents an unpassable wall. The fact that Zooble isn't even in this scene combined with the teaser image shows that Caine is probably going to do something much worse to them in particular. We see Queenie make an appearance in the trailer. There's a good chance this episode will be heavy on flashbacks, but one idea a commenter proposed is that what if one final Hail Mary to make everyone happy, Caine tries to bring everyone's deceased loved ones back, whether that be through NPC recreations or trying to undo abstraction. Ragatha suggests that Caine could fix Kaufmo if it wasn't too late. The thing is, even if he could push the limits and bring them back, they were still miserable before they went, so it may only make things worse. Now, finally, what do we think the ultimate conclusion will be? Remember, Goose said that the message is to find meaning in stagnant life. So endings like everyone escapes or everyone dies are probably off the table. Unless, of course, the stagnant life is referring to the lives they had before the circus. We know at least Pomni and Zooble got there through thrill-seeking. Going back to the alt ending of Happy Place I mentioned earlier, it shows not only a fake exit door, but Pomni actually unplugging the machine and escaping an eldritch Caine, which... only to find a fake freedom still controlled by Caine. It's also possible the stagnant life refers to Caine himself. Regardless of what happens to them, he is eternally in the computer just waiting for the next people, and the cycle continues. And finally, what the teaser implies, that Caine himself will be the one to depart, leaving the circus members to handle themselves. Only problem is, I don't know how Caine will leave without the whole circus collapsing. If they don't make it out, I'm confident the story will close upon a new human entering the circus, and everyone being ready to help them adjust, after finally coming to terms with their own existence. Hopefully the next teaser image glitch drops doesn't completely destroy any of these theories. One final less important thing is, while there probably isn't a glitch cinematic universe, out of all the glitch shows, not including the old ones that they already pretend don't exist, they're all in some kind of post-capitalist dystopia. Murder Drones could very easily follow after Knights of Guinevere, and Gaslight District could easily follow after Murder Drones. The Amazing Digital Circus could be anywhere between them, and there's a good chance, even if they can leave, there is no world outside left for them to return to. Just something to think about. Well, that sure was something. This video is definitely a byproduct of procrastinating. This was a bunch of theories that I've had over the course of time, just smashed together into one theory because I waited too long. So sorry if a lot of this seems just very unfocused. I still do have second thoughts about even making theories about it after what happened, but honestly, when you think about it, I feel like the reason why people latched onto theory crafting so much is probably because of that original Wacky Watch teaser. I mean, you have a secret website with a creepy VHS video on it. What did they really expect fans to do? Regardless, we'll just have to wait and see, as always. Maybe Jax is actually going to be the final villain and just completely destroy everything. Who knows? Don't forget to like the video and also hype the video, because that feature is a game changer. If you liked it, of course.